Did your milk-making journey come with more grief than joy? Do you encounter people in your support practice who mourn over what could have been? The story you will hear today is still raw. It was recorded when my guest Sydney's baby was just over 4 months old, and she was still very much processing her experiences. Listen, process, and know that no matter how you end up feeding your babies, you are good enough. Your babies are well cared for. And it's okay to mourn what might have been. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. Hi, Sydney. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I also know you have your little one here, so we might hear her little noises as well, and that's totally fine.
That I do. She has definitely found her voice, and some days she likes to turn into a little pterodactyl. It's very entertaining.
Yes, that's totally fine. Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, and then we'll get into your baby feeding story.
So I'm Sydney. Like you said, I've got my little girl here. Her name is Lorelai. She's 4 months old. I've been engaged to my fiance Lorelai's dad since November of 2019, and we've been together since July of 2016. Currently live with his parents and his brother for financial reasons. We're currently saving to get our own house, so we've also got 4 dogs with us. At the moment, they're currently sleeping, so hopefully they will stay quiet while we're doing this little podcast.
Yeah. That's fine if they make noise. This is what talking about all things baby and baby feeding sounds like sometimes. You joined the Milk Making Minutes community group, and I invited you to come share your story because I know it's one that so many people will relate to. And you agreed, which I am so glad about because it's still really fresh. How old is
Yes.
Lorelai now?
4 months. She turned 4 months
Okay.
on the 20th. So 4 months, 4
Okay.
days.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So before you actually were breastfeeding, tell me a little bit about what your exposure to breastfeeding, baby feeding was, even growing up, and then as you became an adult, before it was your turn and before you were thinking about feeding babies.
So I'm an only child. My mom actually was not able to breastfeed me. I don't know if it was the fact that I would not latch or if she was having issues with her milk production. I don't know. I think my mom said that she tried for about 2 weeks and then she decided to go full formula. So I didn't really have that much experience or exposure growing up. And really, it started I want to say 2021, when my friend had her son. She was able to breastfeed him for about 6 months. So I thought that it would be pop the baby on the boob, and I would be over at her house quite a bit while I was pregnant, and I would just see her just pull up her shirt, unlatch the bra, pop her son on the boob, and that was it. So that literally was what I thought breastfeeding was going to be like. So from about 20 weeks till I delivered, I was leaking breast milk or colostrum. I'm not sure which one it was. So I thought I won't have any issues breastfeeding. And then baby was born and I had so many issues to the point where it was successful essentially. Yeah.
And so that was really the only exposure that you had to breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I did take a feeding class too, but they just talked about like the do's and don'ts and suggestions, but they never really got like into like problems that could occur, like besides like mastitis and everything, but they didn't talk about any other things that could be on a baby's end for having issues of latching and everything.
Where did you take that class? At the hospital?
Yes, I did. I took it at the hospital
Okay.
where I delivered my daughter.
Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10 and a half hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together.
So, what impact do you think your labor did have on breastfeeding?
Everything. So my daughter was born on September 20th. I was 40 weeks, 3 days, so that would be September 19th when we went in for a non-stress test. The doctor said, I don't see the activity that I like. We are inducing today. So induction started at 11:45 Monday morning. Halfway through, or like probably more Monday evening, at one point the doctor came running into the room, ripped the food away from me, and just screamed, no more eating. That then put me in a panic attack. So it took me a while to calm down, and the doctor just up and left while I was trying to calm myself down. Like, I'm crying hysterically in the bed, and she just walked out the door.
Oh my God.
So the majority of my labor was stressful for the first half because I didn't know what was going to be happening. Nobody really told me what to expect. Even my friend who had her son, she was also induced and she didn't tell me what to expect. I took childbirthing classes, but they focused more on you spontaneously going into labor and what to do when you labor at home and everything like that, and nothing really about inductions. So I went in blind, and it was just that first day was really rough. So continued to labor through the night, and then at 12:30 a different doctor came in. And at this point I got the epidural an hour before, was sleeping, and then this doctor was like, hey, we need to have a chat. Your daughter's having decels with every contraction. She's not tolerating labor anymore. So we have two options. We can continue to labor for another hour, see how she does, and if she continues to not tolerate labor, have a C-section. Or we can go ahead and do the C-section now. I desperately wanted to avoid a C-section just because I knew it's a traumatic surgery for the body. It's going through 7 layers of tissue and muscle and everything, and organ. And I didn't want that, but I knew that for my daughter's health, it was something that I needed to do. So I went ahead with the C-section, and she was born at 12:52 that afternoon. So I was in labor for about 24, 25 hours at that point when she was born. So it was just like, for me, I went into my labor stressed. I had a doctor the admitting doctor, unfortunately, also violated me, which is a trauma that I'm currently working with a therapist on to try to process and everything. So for me, the majority of my labor was stressful, and that didn't really help me or Lorelai.
Wow, I am so sorry. Of course, that did not help your immediate postpartum experience.
Yeah, it was rough. I think the nurses that I had, God love them, they were the best, especially the overnight nurses. Because right after the C-section, I think we did a few minutes of skin to skin, which is what I requested. They did all the tests and everything, and then I actually wasn't feeling too well. I was just very nauseous after the C-section. So I didn't really want to hold Lorelai in case I got sick, which I actually ended up getting sick. Thank God it wasn't on her. That would have been a interesting bath for her. But, so it was a little bit before I really held her, but I honestly don't remember much about the first day. I do remember the lactation consultant coming in and showing me how to breastfeed, and then she would come in for the next few feedings. And then at 7 p.m., it was just me and nurses. And at that point, I was still so exhausted from the labor because at that point, on Monday, I woke up at 7 and I didn't get any sleep until 10 o'clock on Tuesday. So I was exhausted.
Of course you were.
Yeah. So it was just, I didn't really remember, I couldn't remember what the lactation consultant was saying. She started using terms that I wasn't really familiar with. And Lorelai would latch and then it started hurting. And I was like, this doesn't feel right. I know that there shouldn't be pain. I know it's going to be uncomfortable because it's something that my body hasn't experienced before. But I was like, this hurts. So I told the lactation consultant that, and she ended up getting me a nipple shield, which did help. It helped with latching a little bit. We tried a couple different ones. And throughout my stay, I really had issues. The biggest one was that Lorelai would fall asleep on the breast. So she would suckle for about 5 minutes and then fall right back asleep, which was really hard. And there was one night where she was crying for about 2 hours and I was sleeping, and Jared, my fiance, was up holding her and rocking her and trying to get her to calm down so that way I could get some sleep. And looking back on it now, I'm thinking that she was trying to say that she was hungry, and I thought that she was doing great at feedings, but in reality, she wasn't.
Yeah. And when it was a lactation consultant that brought that nipple shield,
Yes, it was.
you're right that you should not be in pain, and pain is an indication that something is going on. And so when she brought that nipple shield, did she do anything else before providing the nipple shield to try to figure out the source of the pain, or was that the first step?
That was the first step. So it was really, for me, as everything is a blur. This was the first night. So it was the 20th, after late afternoon, early evening before she was leaving, that we got the nipple shield. And then, during the night, I would feed her. And then Wednesday morning, she was born on a Tuesday. Wednesday morning, they came back in and I had them make sure that I was doing everything right. And then the lactation consultant looked at her mouth and had Lorelai suck on her pinky and everything, and she goes, I suspect that she has an oral tie. And that was it. That was the only mentioning of the oral tie. So we continued breastfeeding while we were in the hospital, and then we were discharged from the hospital on Thursday afternoon. Probably about 3 hours before we left, the lactation consultant came in and she was like, okay, here's a recommendation or a referral to a pediatric dentist. Your daughter does have has oral ties. And that actually was the source of the problem. She had 2 lip ties or oral ties. She had a grade 3 lip tie and a grade 4 tongue tie. So we got them revised, and the lactation consultant at the pediatric dentist said that the pain that I was feeling while I was in the hospital was her doing a back and forth motion with her tongue, trying to stimulate milk to come out, trying to stimulate milk. So, kind to back up a little bit, we got home. Lorelai was very fussy. It was time for her to feed, and I couldn't get her to latch. When we were leaving, they gave us like the small 2-ounce bottles of formula. I had my fiance feed them because I was in a lot of pain from my C-section. She was upset, I was getting upset, so he fed her. It calmed down, I was able to pump, and at this point I was still only producing colostrum. My milk hadn't come in yet, and this was me being 4 days postpartum. And by Lorelai's first doctor's appointment, we found out that she should have been drinking, I want to say like a half ounce of formula or an ounce of formula, and we were only giving her a couple milliliters of formula. So we figured out that while in the hospital that night that she was very colicky, it was because she was hungry. And she wasn't eating for like getting a full serving those first few days of her life. We didn't know that because nobody told us what to do for her. It was just, oh, just pop the baby on the boob, they'll latch, they'll feed for about 15 minutes, switch to the other boob, and then feed them for another 15 minutes. That's what we were doing. And I hate to say this, but in a way we were unintentionally starving her. So we ended up doing some formula because my milk was struggling to come in. And I think I was about a week and a half postpartum where I finally started having some milk come in. And it would be half an ounce total from both boobs. And then very slowly it would increase to 3/4 of an ounce to an ounce and a half. And then it stopped there. It never went more than like an ounce and a half total. And then it actually got to a point, I want to say probably 2 months postpartum. I think she was drinking about 4 ounces in total, and it would take me 2 days just to get 4 ounces
Oh, wow.
of breast milk for her.
And what was your pumping schedule like?
Every 2 to 3 hours on the clock. It was, or like around the clock, and I think during the day. What I did not know, and no one really told me, was that the best time to pump is in the middle of the night. So with Lorelai, she would sleep practically through the night when we got home. So like her last bottle would be at like 10:30 at night, and then she'd wake up at about 5 o'clock. And this is like at a newborn. So I would wake up, feed her. Yeah. I would tell people that, and they were like, what the heck? That's insane. But no one told me that I needed to pump in the middle of the night. So I would sleep through the night, wake up to feed her, put her back to bed, and then pump some more, and then just kind of continue that cycle throughout the day.
And had she already surpassed her birth weight at this point when she was sleeping through the night?
No, she wasn't. She was like practically sleeping through the night in the hospital too. Like we actually had to set alarms for every 3 hours to wake ourselves up to feed her, so that way she could get back up to her birth weight. Because she was born 7 pounds 13 ounces, and then she dropped down to 7 pounds 0.3 ounces, and then a week after that first weigh-in with the doctor, she got up to 7 pounds 10 ounces. So with my breast milk, she was losing weight. Like she was not gaining, or I should say, with me trying to get her to latch and nurse, she would not gain weight. She was losing weight. So at some point during the first week of her life, when she wasn't latching, I said, I can't mentally deal with that right now. I'm just going to pump, and I'm going to try to get her to latch. And I did that for probably about a week. And at this point, we hadn't had her oral ties released yet. We had an appointment set up for like sometime in late October. And then there was a cancellation, and we were able to get her in when she was about 2 weeks old. So for like that,
Oh,
those
wow.
first, yeah.
Okay.
So those 2 weeks, they did not release it in the hospital, um, which I'll get to in a minute. So for those 2 weeks, we were bottle feeding, and I would pump. I
Hmm.
would try to bottle feed what I could to her, but then I also had to supplement with formula. So she pretty much had formula since she's been born. And then we get to the appointment for the pediatric dentist, and they had a lactation consultant there. And they released the oral ties and everything. They showed me how to do the exercises. And then the lactation consultant said, "Do you mind if I look at your breasts to see how they are?" And she looked at my right one. She said, "Everything looks great." And then she looked at my left and she goes, "You have an inverted nipple." And the left side was the side that Lorelai struggled to latch with. So that's why we had the nipple shield brought in from the lactation consultant in the hospital to try to help bring that nipple out. So that way she would have something to latch to. And at the same time, I'm getting in touch with the lactation consultant at the hospital that I had her at. And I told them what was going on, and they said, "Okay, come see me a week after that revision." So Lorelai was 3 weeks old at this point. We did some latching in the hospital, and they were like, "She's doing great." So I was like, "Can I try doing it like without your help?" Because at the time, I was home by myself. My fiance had to go back to work
Right.
like practically immediately because he had started his new job 2 weeks before she was born. So he was in the
Mm.
hospital with us. He had Friday off, and then he went back to work on Saturday. So I was literally by myself at 6 days postpartum, trying to breastfeed her, trying to make sure that she's staying awake and
Mm.
everything. So
That is so hard.
it was tough, and trying to recover from a C-section. It was mentally and emotionally taxing. And for me, trying to get her to latch and just hearing her crying and seeing her get so mad was heartbreaking. I was just like, I
Yeah.
can't do it. I can't. I have the support system, but I didn't have it when I needed it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Of course.
So
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, I'm just going to bottle feed her. I'm going to become an exclusive pumper. And I think I made that decision at about a month postpartum.
Hmm.
And at that point, she stopped latching completely. She would get
Hmm.
so mad and so worked up. I couldn't do anything to get her to latch. I would put my nipple in her mouth. I would use every technique, every position that the lactation consultant in the hospital gave to me. And her face would get so beet red. She was just so mad that she was hungry and there was nothing coming out of my nipple. When I was working with the lactation consultant after we had the lip tie revision done, she recommended to get my prolactin level checked. And so I reached out to my OB and I said, "Hey, would you be able to put in a request for to have this
I,
done?" And she did.
was this a lactation consultant at the hospital?
Yes.
Or when you saw either the lactation consultant at the hospital or the one at the dental office, did either of them ask about your pumping schedule because they knew you were pumping in addition to trying to latch her? Because you mentioned that you were not pumping through the night. So did either of them check your phalanges and ask about your pumping schedule, or they were just focusing on feeding from the body?
So the lactation consultant at the hospital, while I was in the hospital, they sized me out of 28, so like
Oof.
relatively large. Yeah. And then at the pediatric dentist, they were more focused on feeding from the body, from the breast.
Okay.
I never really officially got sized. I guess you could say like in person. There is a Facebook group that I'm in that is like for exclusive pumpers, and they do have someone who will like virtually size you. So you like take pictures of the flange that you're using, and I did that, and they actually said I was a 17 instead of a
Yeah, that's
28.
most people that I size are anywhere between a 13 and a 19, which is really sad because the two standard sizes that come are the 24 and the 28.
I didn't get a size by the online person, the virtual person, until probably mid-November. So
Yeah,
I was almost 2
right.
months postpartum. I literally was trying to play catch up to try to get more of my milk supply to come in.
Absolutely. Yeah. No one asked you about your schedule. So they didn't know that you were not pumping through the night to say, hey, milk supply works on a 24-hour clock.
Correct. Like they mostly weren't asking about that. About a week later, after I left the in hospital lactation consultant, she gave me a call and she said, "Hey, I never asked you about your pumping schedule." And I told her, and she goes, "That's where your mistake is. You have to pump in the middle of the night. You have to be pumping 8 to 12 times a day." I did not know that. So I would set an alarm for every 3 hours. And for me, I'm such a heavy sleeper. When Lorelai is not crying, I slept through all of those alarms. It was like information that I had wished I had known going in, so that way
Yeah,
I could prepare myself even while I was in the hospital, so that way I could get into that routine of pumping in the middle of the night, so that way I could try to at least even have a half a bottle ready for her and still
absolutely.
do the like half breast milk, half formula, because eventually I got to a point where I would do half an ounce of breast milk, and when she was eating 2 ounces, an ounce and a half of formula. And it just got to a point of she needed so much formula that it would take me almost 4 days just to get one serving for her.
By now, you know that the whole point of this podcast is to share baby feeding experiences through the
Yeah.
lens of systemic barriers. And if your baby was not seeing correctly or hearing correctly by the time they left the hospital, people would not just send you on your way. If your baby is not transferring milk correctly, which is a biological norm, we just send babies on their way and parents on their way and just leave them to deal with it on their own because we know we have milk substitutes. But the inability to transfer milk is an indication of oral dysfunction or hormonal dysfunction in the parent. And so it's showing that something is off. And so the fact that we just send parents on their way and we don't investigate early on what is happening with that dyad and where the issue lies and don't spend more time with those families who are having trouble is a problem before we send them
Mm-hmm.
home. And the fact that you were struggling already in the hospital, but yet you were released with, you were given a referral. But when you have a baby that needs to be fed around the clock, having a referral that takes 2 weeks to have the appointment filled, when that baby needs to be growing from the moment you go home with very little instruction about what to do. It's a systemic problem. Go ahead.
I was just say I completely agree with everything that you just said. For where I had her, it was actually a birth center branch of the main hospital, which is down like downtown. So where I live, where I had her, it was 5 minutes down the road from me. Where the main hospital is like 30, 45 minutes in like downtown, like the downtown city of where I live. So
Mm-hmm.
everything like at that hospital when we were there were four other patients there, so there were five of us all together. So it's not like the lactation consultant was overwhelmed with patients, because I know that there were at least two of them, because I saw two of them within one day. But it's just, for me, the biggest frustration was she had the oral ties and they weren't revised in the hospital, which I didn't understand why. And later I found out in November, 2 months, I'm 2 months postpartum and I'm still struggling with my supply and everything, that they didn't have a doctor who was qualified to revise those ties when I was there. I went at the end, like right before Thanksgiving, to the lactation consultant in November. And on November 16th, they finally had someone who was qualified to do in-hospital oral tie revisions. And I was talking with the consultant and I asked her, I said, is this why I had issues? Is this why I've been struggling? And she said, yes. This is probably one reason why you were struggling, because my daughter couldn't get a good latch around my nipple. Her upper lip would go underneath her gum. And then when we would try to bring the lip out to make that fish shape, it would release the suction. So my daughter would have to start all over again. And then she would get tired because she's burning more calories trying to eat than what she's consuming. So then she would fall asleep on the boob, and then we're trying to wake her up so that way she can continue eating. And it literally was just a vicious cycle. And for me, I did vent my frustration to the lactation consultant, and she's like, you're right, we have to do something better. She said we can set up OB appointments to be a little bit different, to be able to talk with moms of what to expect for an emergency C-section or for an induction. And I said, for the breastfeeding class, talk about pumping more. They just said in the class, don't start pumping until 4 weeks postpartum, so that way your milk can get established. And that was it. They never said, I mean, they also talked about like how to take care of your pump parts and everything, but they never went in depth of how often you should be pumping if you decide to become an exclusive pumper. Everything was, I don't want to say forced, but it was so persuasive of feeding from the boob, and nothing was talked about other methods of breastfeeding, if that makes sense.
There are so many holes in the system, from the lack of robust, individualized prenatal care focused on lactation, to the limited time lactation consultants are able to spend with people in the hospital, to the lack of education around human milk that pediatricians receive in med school, to the limitations that insurance companies put on lactation care. I could go on and on. The reason tethered oral tie releases are not done in the hospital is that this is a very specialized procedure that requires specialized before care and specialized aftercare. The training to do the procedure in a way that benefits breastfeeding is not a standardized part of medical school training, and medical providers must have an interest and seek this training out. If you are considering getting an oral tie release, do your research. Find providers who understand these procedures as it relates to human milk feeding. You can listen to episode 49 of the Milk Making Minutes with tongue tie specialist Lisa Palladino and episode 50, all about tongue tie, if you want more information. Both of these episodes will be linked in the show notes. Did anybody even evaluate your breasts during pregnancy to notice that you had an inverted nipple?
No one did.
Yeah.
Not even my OB. They never even asked what my plan was, formula or breastfeeding. And if they did, I would have been like, hey, can I have someone like look at my breast to make sure that I will be able to, because I know that there are probably some women who physically are not able to breastfeed, but they have the milk supply. I'm pretty sure that is the situation for some women. And it would be nice knowing if there's any bump in the road that I might have encountered, so that way I could try to come up with something to help ease the issue and all of the strain and the just mental and emotional fatigue that I had. I know that when my supply officially was drying up, that when it was officially drying up, I took all of my pump parts out of my room, because that's where I was storing them, and I had them on the 3-tiered cart. I had 3 different pumps. I had one that I got through my insurance. I had one that was given to me by a family member. It was like used like once or twice. And then I had the equipment for a hospital grade pump that could fit the one or fit onto the pump motor that I got through the insurance. I took all of that out, brought that into our family room, went into our room. I just flopped on the bed, screamed and cried into a pillow. And this is at 11 o'clock at night. Like, when I realized it was drying up, I was so devastated. Because for me, it was an experience that I only had 3 days. And honestly, I don't remember them because I was so exhausted from the labor and trying to navigate this recovery from the C-section and everything and navigating motherhood. I don't remember the 3 days that I had breastfeeding. And when I did that, my fiance, luckily at that point, Lorelai was in her own room and she was fast asleep. She didn't hear any of it. At least I don't think she did. But my fiance just stood there and he just watched me crying. And I legitimately cried myself to sleep. Like, I cried until I passed out from exhaustion. And I woke up in the middle of the night and he hadn't gone to bed yet. Like, we were just laying in bed. He was holding me. And I asked him, I said, "Have you gone to sleep yet?" He said, "No, I'm making sure that you are okay." And I told him, I said, "I'm not okay." Because for me, it was an experience. It's one more experience that I was robbed of. That literally is the best way that I can explain that feeling. Because for me, I was robbed of being able to pick when I would be induced or go into labor naturally. I was robbed of the birth that I wanted. Granted, I'm grateful of the fact that we're both here.
Yeah, of course.
But
both things can exist.
Yeah. I was so upset when the doctor said we should do a C-section. And then just having the breastfeeding end so soon and so abruptly that my heart shattered. And the only thing I could do was just scream and cry. And now I'm not fully, I don't know how to explain it. I'm not fully okay. I will be honest. Because I am actually now at a point where I see other women who are talking about their birth stories, or people who have had their kids around the same time that I had Lorelai. And they're talking about their birth story, and they're talking about how they went into labor at home and then they went to the hospital and they had the birth that they wanted. And now they're able to exclusively breastfeed, and they have this freezer stash and everything. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I'm so happy for you, but I am so jealous that you get to experience that. For me, it's a bittersweet seeing other moms. And even for my friend that I was talking about at the beginning, she got 6 wonderful months to breastfeed her son, and I had 3 days. It's hard. It really is.
Yeah, of course. And I don't know what people around you are saying, but other people often tell you, well, you have a healthy baby. What are the things that people around you are saying about your experience?
My mom actually started out shortly after I had her, would ask me how breastfeeding was going. And I would tell her, I said, "Oh, we're struggling with latching. She's not quite getting it. I'm struggling with my milk supply." And then she would go, "When are you stopping?" And I'm like 3 weeks postpartum. And I'm like, I'm going to stop either when she's not interested anymore or I stop producing. And then as time went on, it went, "When are you going to stop pumping?" And then I would talk about what I said of how I feel like I'm being robbed of certain experiences. And then my mom would tell me, she would be like, "Stop focusing on what didn't happen and be happy and grateful for what did." And I would get frustrated because it's like, I'm telling you how I'm feeling, but you're telling me that what I'm feeling isn't validated. Like, it's not real. And that me grieving for the experiences that I never got, I shouldn't be doing that. So I did talk with my mom, and I'm working on that with her about that. And she was like, I'm so sorry I said those things. I didn't realize what I was saying was affecting you that much. So she was being more supportive about me that way. My friend, on the other hand, I would be ranting with her. I would say, oh, I'm having this issue. I would even ask her for advice. I would ask her, did you have XYZ problem? And she would say no. And then she would start almost bragging about her experience. I'm like, okay, you're not really helping me, because you are showing off the fact that you were able to breastfeed your son for 6 months. And I'm happy for you. I really am, but you're not listening to what I'm saying. My fiance and my mother-in-law, or future mother-in-law, they are fantastic. My future mother-in-law has breastfed all 3 of her kids, or 2 of her 3 kids. I think for her first son, Jared's older brother, she didn't, because she didn't really know what to do. Her second, Jared, she breastfed him for 6 months, and then he was no longer interested. So he weaned himself off. And then for their younger sister, she breastfed her for an entire year. So mom, she would help me. She would like give me advice. Like, if she saw that I was getting stuff ready for pumping, she would be like, hey, do you need anything? What can I do to help you? And then when I would get frustrated of the fact that my supply was dropping, she would give me a hug, and she'd say, do you want to cry? And I'd start crying, and she would be there for me. But it also is the fact that we're living with her too. So she was seeing like the whole cycle of emotions that I was going through, whereas with my mom, I wasn't seeing her that much. So she would only see little snippets of the emotions that I was going through. So it was just like, for me, another issue that I've been having, and I'm going to be working with a therapist on, is the people that I thought I would have their support from, that would be in my circle, they're not there. Like my one friend. So it's like navigating everything and trying to find the right people who are going to be supportive of everything that I've gone through is so hard. And for me, there are nights where I'm giving Lorelai her last bottle, and I'm up by myself. No one else is home and everything. And I'm just like, okay, I failed. I failed at breastfeeding. But I have to remind myself that I didn't fail. And that for me is like the hardest part. And I'll say that. And my fiance and his mom will say, no, you didn't fail. Like, you were able to do this for 3 months. You should be proud of yourself, of all of that hard work that you did, and all of the sleepless nights and the hours lost for sleep. Be proud of that.
I'm so glad you have them there to help you combat that voice. And I would take it a step further to say, not only did you not fail, but you in many ways were failed. You were failed by a broken system that didn't have all of the support in place that needed to be there so that you could have the experience that you wanted.
Yeah. And I ended up calling the lactation consultant at the hospital one night, just very upset. I was texting with her throughout the day, and she could even tell that I was getting upset too. And she called me and she was like, okay, let me ask you this. Are you planning on having a second baby? And I said, yes, but it's not going to be for a couple years. Lorelai actually her timing was a surprise for us. We really weren't even trying to get pregnant. Like, Jared and I, we've always talked about having kids and everything. And then, surprise, beginning of 2022, we found out we were having her. And the lactation consultant, she said, okay, when you If you are still local to the area and you still plan on delivering at this hospital, as long as your doctor is okay, we can start making sure that you can produce milk while you are still pregnant, whether that be we start having you pump at 38, 39 weeks pregnant, as long as you haven't had any issues during your pregnancy and everything. And I did ask my OB that at my most recent postpartum appointment, and she said, "Yeah, absolutely. We can work with you. We can try multiple different things so that way you can have a more successful breastfeeding journey. And that way you don't have to go through this heartache again."
Getting support for lactation starting in pregnancy can be critical to having an experience that doesn't leave you brokenhearted. Did you know that often you can get your insurance company to pay for one-on-one lactation education specific to your body and situation starting in pregnancy? Then you will have that private practice consultant available to you once your baby is born. They will already know your history and you will have established a relationship so that if any difficulties arise, they will be there for you once you are nursing. I would love to be the person who helps you in the prenatal period and beyond. You can find my info at www.quavinbirthservices.com, linked, as always, in the show notes. And I want you to know that I've seen you at a distance fighting, trying to make the decisions, whether you were going to continue pumping and giving some amount of milk, whether you were going to let it go. And I've seen you struggling as you did decide to go fully to formula. And I had never met you in person, but I just grieved for you as I saw you making that decision and I saw you grieving. I hurt for you because I knew it wasn't your fault and I knew how much you wanted it to work. And none of us can really explain why. Like when someone says, "Why does it matter? You have a healthy baby." Those of us who want it so badly, it's hard to put into words the why.
It really is. I will say I was listening to a podcast yesterday. I don't remember who it was with. It was you did it in April of 20 of last year. And it was
Mm-hmm.
the mom who had three kids, a similar, very similar situation. And she said that she was so determined to do it that, if I remember correctly, I think she said that she was so determined to do it that it started to affect her mental health.
The episode Sydney is referring to is episode 6 with Danielle. I will link it in the show notes.
And for me, it actually was
Yeah,
starting to
sometimes
affect
you
my
can.
mental health, and I was completely blind to it. I didn't see it. Like the night that I decided to stop in December, Jared and his mom were like, I was getting ready to pump, and they sat down with me and they were like, "I think you need to stop." They're like, "Your supply is dwindling. You're on medication right now," because I was taking Raglan. And
Mm-hmm.
the lactation consultant at the hospital, when I was talking with her, she said that there is another medication, the domperidone, which
Mm-hmm.
is banned in the US. She's, if we weren't in the US and if this wasn't banned, I would recommend this to you because so many women have had more success with domperidone than Raglan. And they're Jared was like, the fact that you are only able to lactate by taking a medication, your body is done. And he was like, I'm scared to see where this is going to put you. And hearing that, the fact that I was scaring him opened my eyes and said, I do need to stop. Like, it was almost becoming obsessive for me, and I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, that is so hard. And the thing that I try to help my clients see who are in similar situations is it's okay to continue to feel whatever you feel about the lost experience. And the thing that matters most when we look at longitudinal studies of the health of babies and the health of children when it comes to the relationship with their parents is that their parents are okay And so in the end, of course, we want babies to have breast milk because we know breast milk is good for them. But what matters more is that their moms are healthy, mental health wise.
I remember seeing a video on TikTok, and it was a mom, and she was just like recording herself doing a couple of her daily tasks. And she said one thing that kind of really stuck with me, and this was when I was like right after, I think it was like the night I decided to stop pumping. She said that you can't fill other people's cups if yours is empty.
Mm-hmm.
And that just made me think, I was like, Jared, at this point, Jared had finally fallen asleep after he was making sure that I was okay. And I had just woken up to go to the bathroom, and then I just couldn't fall asleep. And I was laying there after watching that TikTok thinking, she's right. I can't take care of Lorelai if I can't take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm at 0 and I'm giving it my all to Lorelai, to taking care of her and being the best mom that I can be, and just doing everything I can to give her the best life. If I'm at 0, I have nothing else to give. And for me,
Right.
just sitting on the couch at 11 o'clock at night, watching the bottles never filling up and being bone dry. I had gotten to that point, actually, even with taking Raglan.
Mm-hmm.
The bottles were bone dry. Flanges were bone dry. I was dry. That for me was the breaking point. I had probably 2 drops come out of my left boob, and my right boob was completely dry.
That is so hard. And you're so right that if we're at the end of our rope, it's so hard to give to our children. So I thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing this story, because so many people experience this because it is a systemic problem.
You were there for me when I didn't have that many people there. And even after, when I messaged you, I was like, what should I expect?
Mm-hmm.
And I was terrified of the fact that it would take weeks to fully dry up, because for me, not pumping, it was torture. It was the worst thing I really had felt. It really was. I think out of all of the negative, like rough, like the hardships that I've gone through in my life, with losing family members and losing my dad, not pumping anymore to be able to provide to provide my daughter food that I made, that my body made, was the hardest thing I had ever done. I was determined to do it, and I'm happy I did it for 3 months, and I'm happy that I have enough to actually get breast milk like jewelry. So I'm gonna get a ring to celebrate the fact that I did this for 3 months.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you're doing that, because you worked so hard, and it's not the outcome that matters. You did everything you could. Well, I thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sydney's story reminds us to be gentle with those around us who are feeding their babies. It reminds us to listen more and talk less when they are sharing their stories. It reminds us to acknowledge and validate pain, and to recognize that even if we don't fully understand the pain, we can be a shoulder to cry on and a place for the grief to be heard. This can go a long way towards healing. If you know someone who has suffered from not having the milk-making experience they hoped for, and you invalidated their experiences, even inadvertently, it is never too late to tell them you are sorry. You can start by sharing this episode with them and let them know you got a glimpse into how they may have been feeling. If you want to join a community of people who care about repairing the holes in the perinatal care system so that fewer people suffer so much, join my growing Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. Whether you are a parent or someone who supports parents, Whether you had your children 30 years ago or are in the thick of milk making, your voice makes a difference. I'll see you there. Bye.